Dotiv, Integrative and Preventive Healthcare. The content discussed in this episode is for informative purposes only
and should not be replaced by individualized professional consultations or professional medical advice.
Hey guys, I'm Tasha.
Hey listeners, this is Goonie, and we're here to discuss lifestyle medicine.
I'm not teaching you anything new, but
Girl.
I'm going to be turning 30 this year, and I feel a certain type of way. And it's because, I'm getting a lot of pressure from my family. Did you find a partner? Are you going to settle down?
Have children. Basically the pressure of like having kids before your time is air quotes up.
Yeah, for sure. And it's not only your family, it's also when you see some of your peers who are having their kids, getting married, etc. And so you're kind of thinking, time is running up.
It is hard because I started thinking about it before I even received the backlash from people or like the questions, I would say, not backlash. When I was around 28, 29, and it almost becomes like a existential question because you're like, oh, I need to get married so that I can have kids, but I haven't even found a partner. And then if I haven't met someone, how will I start a family? And then do I even want a family? What do I need to do? And then I don't even know how to answer these questions, right?
Are you going to settle down, have kids started even before, turning 30, right? For the South Asian community, 30 is like, I'm kind of expired already. And so this talk usually happens by the age of like the earlier the better, they say, right? So it's like 20, 21, some are 18 years old. The way it's talked about, it's more like you want to think about it so you don't, become an old mother or, but you want to have all these steps ready so that you have this ultimate perfect life that everyone aspire to. And to be honest, there is a biological clock. Yeah. It is a valid point to bring it up. But I think it's more the way it's brought up. I think instead of putting the pressure on women to rush into motherhood and to pick motherhood before they are ready to is a bit of a tricky conversation.
Yeah, like instead of like telling us, oh, you need to conform and meet all these like societal standards of like what's the right timeline in life, maybe give us some options and tell us like, how do we go about it? What's the mindset around it? Especially because there's like real options out there on like surrogacy or like IVF, right? These are the things that exist today.
A better conversation, I think, is to address the readiness of what it takes to be a mother and lay down the options and potential risks so that you can, as you navigate life, decide what you want for yourself.
And it's also tricky because like I don't see many examples of women in my circle or in my network, in my family that I can lean on or to have these like open-hearted conversations about what these options actually mean and how they would look like if you do decide on one direction or decide against another option,
And to be fair to our parents and to these uncles and auntie, the tech that is around has only been mainstream in the last decade. So they themselves didn't know, about it back then. Plus, it was very expensive. So now I think it's the parents that are coming, the new generation, the new cohorts of parents should inform their kids on that. That's my personal view.
Yeah, it's unfair to put that pressure or lay that expectation on them when it's fairly a new technology, right? But I guess this ties back to our intention for this conversation and wanting to have it in the first place, right? Which is why we wanted to invite Simi Godagama to be part of this conversation so that we can openly have this dialogue. So Simi is an acupuncturist and Ayurvedic practitioner, board director of the British Ayurvedic Medical Council, known as BAMC, chair of Information and Communication Committee for BAMC, and the director of the Little Buckingham Clinic in Milton Keynes in the UK.
So welcome, Simi, to Dotiv The Podcast.
Hello, lovely to be here.
So, we were speaking about, the pressure of having kids.
Oh, absolutely. I think the first and foremost thing is to say that I'm South Asian. So it's a absolute given. I think as growing up in the South Asian culture, it's a very prominent aspect of being a girl, growing up in the world. And so the pressures are there subliminally in childhood. And I think that this is not just exclusive to South Asian communities. I think it's just generally as being a girl. But the pressure is somewhat more for girls in this particular diaspora. back then, sort of 10 years ago, there was not much information about awareness of couples and conceiving. So questions were thrown out. And so, yeah, I'd say from the moment, the day we got married, it was something that was a definite pressure for me.
You get your periods, like they already kind of brief you about the fact that, you know, this will come. And then when you're around, you're 18, 21, then you're like, get ready, you need to
start preparing yourself.
That's
put that
right.
as a major thing. And I think that there's no harm in that, because I think actually preparing your mind, preparing your body for the changes that, you know, as women go through, not just to conceive, but the journey of pregnancy and then into motherhood, is something that we need to be aware of, without that element of pressure, but more information.
The mindset is the transition that we need to really like focus on, right? I guess our parents would have thought to educate us, and then from education we have to straight go into motherhood, right? Like there was no transition period, or to have that bridge, or like something to prepare you slowly mentally and then physically, because physically it's already happening, so you'll just adjust accordingly. But the mental part of it is like, can be quite torturous, I would think.
Absolutely. And I think it's true, because I mean, the pressures of going through university, getting your studies, getting your career in line, I think that is huge, particularly also in the South Asian community. And then there's this level of confusion afterwards, where it's like, what is my role? What is my identity? Am I career woman? Am I supposed to be housemaker, homemaker? And then we get into that dilemma of an identity crisis, essentially, of where we lie within that realm, and we never quite satisfy either role, you know. So the dilemma and the conflict starts right from that point, really.
We don't even consider like, is there going to be a challenge in conception? If you just think, oh, straight, we're going to have a baby and it's just going to happen, right?
I actually have fears that I can't conceive, and this has been embedded in my mind since a long time. So with a partner or not, I've been afraid of, or what if I can't conceive? And this is like me getting ahead of myself. It is something that I am afraid of.
Yeah, I think that's a really valid and honest thing to say, because I also had this fear of conceiving. And it's not until time goes by and you start to reflect on your mindset. And I look back on sort of my mindset 15 years plus 20 years ago, when I was thinking these things. And I wonder how much of those thoughts where you worried about conceiving, where does it stem from? Is it a fear of conception? Is it a fear of being a mother? Is it to do with your past experience? Is it to do with your relationship with your own mother as well? You know, that maybe there's lots of these factors, and we mustn't forget that, you know, is it also connected to a trauma that you've experienced in childhood? And when I am in clinic and I'm treating women for fertility, it's one of the questions that I explore, is I look into the historical ideas and what their relationships are with being a mother. You know, it's really, really important to look at these things, but it's also can be quite difficult as well.
Interesting that you say that also, because one of my aunts told me the same thing. She's like, if you don't deal with your issues with your mom, they will show up at some point, whether or not it's at pre-conception or post-conception, and you'd have to address it. And it might be a rude awakening if it comes in a way that you're not prepared for, right? And it's a lot of pressure, I would think, for any person, let alone like someone who's expected to like bear a child, right?
Yeah.
It's an important thing. And I think that actually, just to, you know, diving into my own personal journey, when I first started to understand that there wasn't conception happening as a practitioner, you know what you would say to a patient. And for me, it was a personal challenge that, oh, here I am as a complementary healthcare practitioner experiencing infertility, and it was primary infertility, which was diagnosed after a laparoscopy. And it was a real hard hit. You know, it was a shock to the system. You know, I've lived a healthy life, I've taken care of my mind, my body, but what is going on here? So that's when I started to seek psychotherapy help. So I started to look at what would I say to myself if I was a patient of my own, and I would look into these historical aspects, if there's anything at play, and that revealed a huge body of information for myself to work with. So I gave myself that time. And I know that when it comes to fertility, you feel that every month is a month lost and time seems to speed up for some reason. But exploring that and giving myself that space was really, really profound. I actually started to go on self-retreats, silent retreats, and just really kind of connect with myself in a deeper level.
Do you feel that being labeled as infertile or having issues conceiving help the healing process?
Yeah. It was just a turning point, really. And sometimes, I mean, I have patients coming in with all sorts of medical diagnoses, and we attach ourselves to labels, you know, I am infertile or I cannot conceive. And in some ways, yes, that can be useful because it takes you on a journey of exploration. It takes you on a journey to find the solutions, but it's always important to see how you're speaking to yourself. So I was aware that for me, every time I said, oh, I'm suffering from infertility, I was compounding that sense in my body. I was basically talking to my ovaries and talking to my uterus and saying, you're not going to conceive a baby.
Right.
So I started to change that. And I started to look at how am I going to enhance my wonderful, precious body to create life. And so I changed that narrative. And to this day, you know, I feel that regardless of a positive pregnancy outcome or not, that journey that was instigated by the diagnosis of infertility was absolutely an amazing experience for me on a personal level as a human being. It kind of forced me to look a little bit inward. And as a practitioner, we're so geared towards looking at taking care of others. But this particular experience forced me to take my own medicine, really.
So as you're going through this, you know, process of having a diagnosis around your fertility, what are the options you start considering?
Sought help from a counselor who helped me to sort of look at these past conversations or the healing that needed to take place from childhood experiences and childhood traumas, which were actually at play, as I understood, as we sort of progressed through the treatments with the psychotherapist. So that really was pivotal in me trying to actually understand that what my body is doing now, it's not a permanent situation. It's something that I can start to unravel. And that really supported me. And obviously my own medicine as an Ayurvedic practitioner and acupuncturist, I'm very fortunate to have my father. So he gave me acupuncture treatments every week. And I started taking the Ayurvedic herbs. I started to really acknowledge my own dosha, my Ayurvedic energetic constitution, and look at my life and what was really aligning with me. So for me, it was about what was not needed anymore. What did I need to eliminate from my environment, from my physical body, to help clear the path for conception?
Right. So it's like having to reset your mind or turn your mindset around. But what about, for example, adoption or even medical route?
Absolutely. So we initially considered fostering, and we then considered adoption. We actually, then after I had a medical procedure, a laparoscopy that kind of confirmed everything, I gave myself 3 months, because as soon as you start to think of infertility, this small little clock in the corner of the room starts to be this huge clock in front of your face, you know, and so ticking all the time. It's like tinnitus in your ear. And so I gave myself 3 months. And if after this, you know, confirmation of the primary infertility, I don't conceive in inverted brackets naturally, I would start seeking IVF and get myself on that kind of train, because it can be a long process. So I engaged with a consultant to look at what route we could take.
As we know, your dad is Dr. Godagama, who is known as, you know, one of the pioneers of Ayurvedic medicine in the UK. And so, you know, knowing the background, you being also a practitioner in the CAM industry, how did your conversation with him, for example, go around IVF? And was he Was he supportive?
So when I first discussed this with him, we sat down, we looked at the options available, like taking the Ayurvedic herbs, taking the acupuncture, looking at all the sort of relaxation methods that were needed and exploring your history. And then I said about the IVF, and he said, yes, this is something that you should really consider. And I battle with that idea. I mean, it's not that I've never taken Western medical interventions for things, but generally that's not your first port of call. And IVF, in my mind at that time, seemed like a sort of unnatural, artificial route towards conception, and involved a lot of tweaking of my body, which I had no control over. So it was also about the control factor, handing that over to scientists and doctors, which I wasn't very happy to do. And he looked at me and he said, why? And I said, because it's not natural, because you've raised me and we're both in this world of natural medicine, and it feels like I'm almost going against that grain. And he said to me, okay, look at it this way. If I needed to have an operation and have a stent put in my heart to help my heart and for my body to function, would you say that that is an unnatural process, so you shouldn't engage with it? And I said, of course not. He said, well, medicine is there regardless of whether it is a surgical approach or a medical approach or a chemical approach. The medicine is there to enhance your body's ability to do what it does naturally. So once you engage with the IVF, if then perhaps it is not giving you the results that you want, then perhaps that is nature, and that was really profound for me to hear him say that. Almost felt like I had permission to proceed, I had this blessing to proceed. So I just went for it wholeheartedly, just washed away with me from that idea of it not being natural. And I talk about this actually with my patients who come in and they don't want to discuss IVF and they don't want to go down that route. And I try and encourage it as much as I can.
Western medicine has its space along the complementary medicine. Did you feel that even mentally and physically something happened?
I felt like actually I felt lighter, and I then realized that I was carrying a lot of pressure behind the whole idea of natural conception. That idea of being a failure just completely disappeared. And that made things a lot easier, because when I walked into the consultation for IVF and all the procedures that followed it, I actually went into it with a really positive mindset. That this is something that's assisting me, as opposed to this is something that's taking away my control.
I would have the same thought process, because even when my dad had his bypass, it was all these questions that we had. It's like, is it something we need to do because it's not natural, it's very intrusive? And kind of a similar conversation I had with our cardiothoracic surgeon. He's just like, well, do you want to live or do you want to die?
Absolutely. It comes down to absolutely. And I think that it's that black and white, because for me it was like, well, do I want to go down this route that seems a bit endless, or do I want to engage in something that might give me some positive results, and result in a baby? So I think each to their own. I have some patients who come in and they really want to just not even consider the IVF. And I feel that every journey is individual. So if you're struggling with fertility or conceiving, IVF isn't always something that is going to be important for everybody to consider. It's all down to the individual journey that you're going through.
Were you afraid of potentially that not working out? How much are you guaranteed that this would work?
So I did the usual thing, which was to research all the IVF clinics in the whole country. I went to Harley Street, I went to the Central London clinics, I went to the top clinics. I had all consultation. I think I must have had about 10 consultations. Wow. I was going crazy. I even knew which clinics had the best paint on their walls. Okay.
Oh wow.
But it was going too much, and then it got to a point where I realized that I'm going around in this vicious cycle, and it was all stemming from the stress that I was going through and also this tendency of wanting to control everything. So I let it all go. I stopped reading statistics. I went to my local clinic just down the road, and I decided my stress levels were the most important, because stress takes a huge role in the outcome of IVF. So knowing that, I thought, well, it's not about going to the best gleaming clinic that has best paint on their walls, it's going somewhere that reduces your stress, allows your partner to attend because I think that partnership is really, really nourishing. And Milton Keynes is where I'm from. So we went to a clinic where we could both access, and he could be part of all the processes, if not most of them.
Even when we spoke to like another Chinese medicine fertility specialist, she was saying that most often when women come in and they're having the struggles, she tells them to go on a holiday with their partners. And then right after the holiday, they come back pregnant. And it just goes to show, like, you need to cultivate an environment and a space that is relaxing and where you feel like you can connect with your partner, right?
It is all about that connection, but also particularly during the IVF process, where you're monitoring your follicles growing every week and you're seeing them on the screen, want to be able to connect to what's happening in your body too. And I think that one of the beautiful things actually of going through IVF is that you are able to connect with the process of conception in such a fantastically deep way, if you bring the mindfulness aspect.
So how is the IVF process? Like, how does that work?
Oh, there's lots of different ways that you can have IVF, but for me, I can talk about my process, which involved a lot of scans. So just to kind of give a brief idea, because it's a huge field. So at the initial stage, it was about trying to build up the follicles, so to try and grow the follicles on both sides. And so it gets to a point where it is mature, the follicles are mature enough for them to then extract those follicles. So then that's called the egg collection process. And then they extract the eggs, and then for my partner, they receive the semen, and then it's put together really essentially in a petri dish, and they wait 24 hours to see which eggs have turned into embryos, so which have fertilized. And you get a summary the next day of how many eggs have fertilized, and they grade them as well, which again you've got to take with a pinch of salt as well. And then they normally, back then, they would advise you of which ones you would want to be transferred back in, and there's usually a 3-day transfer or a 5-day transfer into blastocyst. So I went for a 3-day transfer. At that stage, they will also be able to tell you if there are any embryos that are worth freezing for future use, especially if the current sort of cycle fails. Then you've got a reserve, and you don't have to go through the whole process of growing those follicles into mature follicles.
The follicle growing process, how long does that take?
So it's actually not that long. So for me, it took roughly about 3 weeks of regular scans, sometimes 2-3 times a week. They're scanning and just seeing how mature these follicles are becoming. And there are many sort of little hurdles that you can go across, whilst you're in that process. So each scan felt like a hoop that we had to jump, and it's felt like an exam really to pass that test.
Right.
So when you get those follicles growing, it's that injections you see?
Absolutely. So the injections are daily injections, and then there's a trigger injection, which is a little bit more, they're not very painful. I actually, as an acupuncturist, wimped out, even though I deal with needles all the time. My partner was the one who put the needles in for me, so he measured up and everything, and that's also about the connection. So I handed him that responsibility of measuring the vials out, measuring and taking the right amount and the right concentration and administering that.
So what's in that injection?
So it's the hormones that basically help to balance, and the hormones that help to grow the follicles are in those injections.
Okay.
And in comparison to the natural way of conceiving, right? If you were to go the natural route and you speak to your gynecologist, what is the time frame difference between the two?
For the whole process? So for me, when I first discussed about IVF, from the first discussion to actually having a pregnancy test positive, the process took about 4 to 5 months from the initial consultations, which is why I often encourage patients who are coming in for natural conception, if this is something that they would consider at some point, I often say to them, get the ball rolling now, because by the time you've decided, okay, then you'll have to wait another 2-3 months to then get started.
In terms of prices, is this a procedure that costs a lot?
Well, on the NHS, they do allow you to have a primary infertility after a certain number of months or years that you've been unable to conceive. You will be qualified, and that changes from area to area. For me, I went through the private route, which meant that I didn't have to be on a waiting list either. So usually back then, this was nearly 10 years ago, there's about a 6-month waiting list. And I don't know, in the current sort of environment, it may even be longer.
Your process for IVF was about 5 months from start to positive pregnancy test. But if you went the natural route and you were to conceive the natural way?
Some acupuncturists will say a minimum of 6 months of treatment. I am slightly different in my approach because I've been through infertility myself. I understand that to be rejected by a practitioner because you haven't come in 6 months, let's say you've got an idea to do IVF at the end of the year and you've only got 2 months to go, I would still take that patient on because you can never predict what can happen even after one treatment. And I've had patients, and I'm not going to sort of, say this is going to happen to everyone, but I've had quite a number of patients who, after like a couple of sessions of acupuncture, have had positive pregnancy tests naturally, and others who have taken longer. Minimum, I would say, is 3 months, really. 3 menstrual cycles is the given for whether it's to conceive or whether it's to improve your IBS or whatever the system you're needing to change. The body takes 3 months to really acquire that change and manifest it.
And how did your knowledge and experience as a complementary medicine practitioner, and also just growing up with Ayurveda and being an Ayurvedic practitioner, did that knowledge help you in the process of conceiving?
Absolutely. I cannot stress how much of that, not just the medicines or the Ayurvedic herbs that I took or the acupuncture that I received, but the wisdom behind it and the philosophy behind it and the mindfulness aspect behind it, which really helped me to understand where I was missing, in those departments. So it's quite a humbling experience as a practitioner to have to face those parts that you've been preaching to others, but have kind of ignored for yourself. So it had a huge role to play. Absolutely.
I mean, again, it goes to show that everything goes hand in hand, be it the Western medical system or the traditional medical system. They have a place, especially when there's a point where your body might not be functioning as it's supposed to, and it can go hand in hand and help you in that process. For people who are out there who are trying to conceive and considering this, doesn't necessarily mean if you really want a child on your own, there are options out there.
There are absolutely options, and it's about, yes, that integrative approach, and not just through to conception, but even after and throughout the pregnancy. I was carrying twins at the time, so it was a huge stress on my body, and I'm quite a small framed person, so I really believe that the acupuncture I had throughout the whole pregnancy and postpartum had a huge role to, people sometimes ask me, well, how did you get over this? And I say, well, I had the herbs, I had the acupuncture, and I had the osteopath make sure that my back was being able to be strong and support the twin pregnancy and the extra weight gain. So there's so many different tools that you can use.
Yeah, it's very holistic. I think you're pointing out that we can't just look at things in isolation. And I think that's should be a practice in everything we do. But, it becomes very apparent when it's a health condition. I think you've given us enough information for us to kind of reflect and decide how to navigate potentially wanting to conceive or have a child or what to do.
It's a natural concern, and the major thing that I find, not just in my personal experience, but also in patients that I see, is the stress. It is that pressure. Going back to your first question, is where's the pressure? How is that pressure being engendered? How can you alleviate that pressure? And whether, you do that through a natural route or you do that using IVF, it's still just as important, if not more, with the IVF, And so I would advise anybody who is going through any fertility issues, really look at alternative routes, but also if you need to go through the Western IVF route too, the two can come together very, very beautifully.
When you think about it, that kind of tying back to the initial conversation with Tasha to speak about IVF, it's really about knowing what are our options, turning 30s and having all these different pressures, and also rethinking also the route before you even get to even conceive. Is like, did you deal with your traumas? Did you address your stresses? Are you in a space where even motherhood is something you want for yourself and it's not coming from, societal pressures? So I think that it gives us a lot to think of.
Yeah. And I guess, Goody, from what you're saying, this whole conversation, it's essentially a gateway for and an invitation for parents to have an open dialogue with their kids, and even just friends having that open dialogue about options that are existing out there, so that we can actually remove the stigma and taboo around the alternate ways of conceiving. If you choose to go the natural way and it's possible for you, then that's great. But if you can't do that for whatever reason, these are like actual alternatives available and accessible to you.
Mhm.
Absolutely. I think that's a really, really important thing. And it comes back to also that conversation I had with my father when we did conceive, and then we had the girls. He said something that was really profound. He said, "Oh, you're the first in our generation to have IVF children." And he said it with a pride that, you know, that as human race, we've excelled and we've advanced to such wonderful stages that we can bestow upon people this ability to procreate and become parents. And it's a wonderful, wonderful thing to be proud of, you know. And I think that's a conversation that needs to be had, that either way there is absolute beauty in either process.
Yeah. This whole point actually reminded me of a cousin of mine who actually got IVF, and she kept it a secret from the whole family until the babies were delivered. And we were also confused because we're like, this is a miracle. Like, this is a great thing that you've done. And she got twins as well. And doing this episode, I really am realizing and reflecting through your experience, Simi, like kind of the pressures that she probably would have faced, and maybe she didn't have the tools to
probably didn't. And also I think it's just your surrounding environment as well, because you know, going back to being South Asian, it is a taboo. It is something that we feel that is something that's dysfunctional within either, you know, one or the other, you know, the husband or the wife, or there's a dysfunction in the marriage even, you know, what's wrong there. And I think that, you know, trying to dismantle that is really, really important. So my girls are now nearly 9, and they know about IVF. They know how they've started. And this is a conversation I had right from the beginning. And I said, well, when I'm embarking on this, I'm going to be open about it. I'm going to speak about it, because when they are in this world, do we hide that where their origins are, you know? What message do we send then? But often in clinic, it's mostly the South Asian patients that I see, that either the women are coming on their own and the partners are not turning up. And this is something that I'm very, very strong about convincing and getting the partners to come and seek support. There's a huge dynamic at play when they're both coming in. And also they're the ones who are least likely to let their families and in-laws know that they're going through this. So they don't have the support network. If you don't speak, you don't receive the support network. So you've got to start by speaking.
Again, it's about the pressures and the stresses you have around conceiving. And if you don't have the, you know, the support from your partner, if you don't have the blessings from your family, if you don't have an environment that helps you in the conception, it's hard to,
it's a huge load to take.
So it's like cultivating that space where you also allow people to trust you with their story, and then you're building a community, right?
Yes,
a support network.
That's where we exchange, and that's how we grow, really. You know.
Before you go, Simi, we have rapid fires question, and the first one is, what do you notice? What are the first signs that shows that you're out of balance?
My sleep. So as soon as I have a day where I am just wired and I can't get to sleep, I might be excited, I might be writing something, or maybe even painting something, you know, and I have to check in with myself saying, and as a practitioner of Chinese medicine as well, I'm like, that's my liver qi, you know, that's my certain meridians that are at play here. So that's speaking to me. So my body speaks to me when my sleep rhythm goes out of sync, and then everything else is a cascade of events after that.
And I guess to counter that, what is the coping mechanism to get yourself back into balance?
To be honest, it is to have a pause day. So I give myself permission, and I think, Gunny, you've known me to have a few pause days. So I've just, you know, I do not return phone calls. I do not reply or respond to emails, and I will literally just sit in the house. And almost, it's not a tantrum on my life, but it's really, maybe it is, but it's like saying no, right? A big fat no, saying, I'm saying no to everything, and I'm just going to just sit and listen to the birds.
Yes. I'm going to use this now.
I'm going to look at the daisies. I'm going to actually admire the weeds that are growing in my garden.
Since I haven't been on top of it, I'm going to look at them.
I'm not going to look at them with anger. I'm going to look at their beauty, But just to sit and breathe, just to pressing pause is something that I often end up doing after those kind of mad nights of not being able to sleep. And then I press a pause, and I find that my body and rhythm just starts to sync again. And I give myself permission now to do that. And as a mother of young children, I'm running multiple different businesses, and it's very important to give yourself that permission. I didn't know that it was something I could grant myself, that, I always think that I needed to ask my husband, not ask my husband, but just tell him, I need to just not do anything. Why are you telling me? You just do it yourself, just make that decision. You don't need to ask for permission.
So sweet.
She does have the most awesome husband. So I'm not biased here. But she's very lucky.
I do.
And our last question is, what is the book that impacted the most your view or your approach to well-being?
Well, there's two books. One, it probably sounds like I'm plugging it, but I'm not. It's my father's book, because I was very young. I was 16 years old when he was writing it at the time, and I was very heavily involved in proofing it for him as a 16-year-old who was pretty good at English grammar at the time, and still is, I suppose. And so I really got to read his words and then see the finished product in the book when it was published. And that had a profound effect on me. But prior to that, I was 14 when I first picked up the Dalai Lama's book, the Tibetan Book of Living and Dying. And it really, really, really had an impact on my life and the art of happiness, I'd say. I didn't understand most of it. I was 14. A lot of it went over my head, but there was something very soothing to the soul reading those words in that book.
Thank you for sharing.
Thank you so much for having me.
If you enjoyed this episode, go ahead and select that follow or subscribe button. For now, stay safe, and we'll see you next week.